Hi, I'm Meredith. This is Harrison, and we are P1 Picks, a Formula One podcast that looks at data and analytics to give you the edge on betting lines going into Formula One races. So, we are just a few days away from the Canadian Grand Prix and very excited about this race. I think it's a real barometer for where are we actually in Formula One? Am I right, Harrison? I think that after Monaco, after Imola, we've seen the field definitely shrink quite a bit. And I think Canada is going to be a great opportunity for us to get a real idea of what this overall constructors and drivers championship race is going to look like for the rest of the season.
I'm thrilled, right? And the constructors is close. There's 30-ish points between Red Bull and Ferrari.
Yeah.
I think that the drivers' championship is pretty close. Charles is only about 30-ish points back. So this is a weekend once again where Red Bull are going to be under pressure, right? We know they were a tenth ahead in Imola. They've lost the last two races. The good news about Canada is you can overtake, right? So we don't have that same problem where it's a snooze fest and drivers are just going to drive really slow and not necessarily use their tires. So this is a track where people can overtake, but this is also a track where you need a lot of confidence and you need the car in a setup where you don't have a ton of drag. So, right, you're not going to have a huge, large rear wing here. Your confidence under braking and precision on turn-in is really going to be key here. And so as we start to make these bets, I really want to look at drivers who are in good form, teams that are going to be in good form to be able to make good decisions. Last year was a one stop. Ferrari went roughly 40 laps on a set of tires. So we need a driver who's able to manage his tires well and a team that's not going to get sucked into an early bad pit stop. With that said, can we get into it? Can we jump into
Yeah.
these picks? Let's do
Wait,
it.
yeah, let me direct you on where we're going to go because I already know where you're leading me to, and that's drivers in good form
Okay.
and drivers that we feel like we have a little bit of confidence in. And I know you want to talk Yuki Tsunoda. So let's just go. Let's go with that. Harrison, it's the first bet you told me about this week. I think let's go on the Yuki train. Tell me
Okay.
about it.
The Yuki train. So the Yuki train has value for two reasons. I'm going to share my screen.
Go for it.
Okay, so here's what I love about Yuki Point's finish. Yuki Point's finish should happen because it seems like not only is Yuki in good form, but let's shift the conversation. Aston Martin's in terrible form.
Yeah.
Alonso is out of the points for the last two races. Not even is he out of the points, he's been outqualified by Lance Stroll in the last three races. That's something that's
That's
very un Alonso, right? So
yeah.
I think part of this bet, part of the reason I feel so confident in Yuki is the other teams around him are in a terrible spot. Haas is strong, but not potentially stronger than a Racing Bull over a race stint. Yuki is stronger right now than the Aston Martins. He is kind of in this awkward space where they're not quite as fast as Mercedes, but they're not quite as slow as the rest of the midfield, right? They're not quite as slow as Haas, Aston Martin, maybe Williams, Albon, maybe if he has a good day. But the rest of these teams, the Ferrari, the McLaren, the Red Bull, they're a little bit out in front.
Yeah.
Mercedes are kind of in no man's land, right? They're kind of the fourth fastest team. We know that they're going to be seventh and eighth every weekend, barring something crazy. Yuki should be ninth or 10th. I really like Yuki in the points, and I think anytime you're able to find that at minus 160 going into the weekend, he struggles to put a wheel in the wrong place. Sure, you can give him that China was a little bit of bad form, but he's been to Canada. He's raced there before. This is a driver who's just in strong form. And even though Perez was kept for 2 years, I expect Yuki to be potentially on the market next year. Even if he stays another year at Racing Bull, um, depending on what Honda does, he's a driver who I think is really set up for future success in Formula One.
Yeah.
Um, and I think let's kind of talk about the broader picture as we look at this next bet. It has
Mhm.
the potential to be very close this weekend. We know pre Miami that Red Bull had about a 4/10 advantage over both Ferrari and McLaren. It looks like the McLaren upgrade over the last two races have really just brought them to maybe a tenth down per second, and it really depends on how Red Bull is able to nail this setup. And with the bumps, with how well we know the Red Bull struggles over bumpy racetracks, especially where you need to be able to use the bumps and the curbs to gain lap time, aka Montreal. They're potentially going to struggle, and I think we don't know what the competitive picture is going to look like until after qualifying. But I think one thing we can say is under 5 seconds is potentially a great bet because it's going to be a one stop, which means we know that this potentially has a lot to be like Imola, right? We know that Red Bull struggles sometime to get the hard tire in the right place. We know that they're going to have to run 40 laps because you don't want to make another pit stop at Canada. I expect it to be close. McLaren
Yeah.
should be able to. McLaren just seems to be much better on the hard tire, like we saw in Imola, and I don't necessarily expect that trend to change. Now, the other piece is I expect Ferrari to be a little bit closer. It seems that as they understand this package a little bit more, this will be their second race post Imola to understand their new upgrade. If they're able to claw half a tenth or a tenth out from this upgrade, they're potentially there with Red Bull and McLaren as well. So Max isn't going to be able to have a free pit stop. Things like that are really going to be able to affect the strategy now. And I just think Lando is in really good form. I think Charles is in really good form. I think you look for this race to be close.
Yeah.
With that said, let's talk about a podium finisher, right?
Okay, let's go. You're just going through all the bets. Let's do
If
it here.
if you don't, I want to give the people some value. We had a
Yeah,
rough
let's do it.
Monaco, but I think as the books start to open before we see the cars hit track, I think there's a lot of value that we can look at. Lando
Yeah.
to finish on the podium, I love this bet. Lando might have the fastest car this weekend, right? Red Bull struggles a little bit. We know Ferrari have they go well over bumps, but does it necessarily have the pace in the slow corners? Does it have the pace in the fast corners? Lando potentially has the fastest car here, and being able to find a minus 200 bet for a driver who has potentially the fastest car going into the weekend, I like that a lot. We don't win a lot here on a minus 200, but I think, hey, let's clean up where we can, especially
Yeah.
because if we're able to hit on under 5 seconds, you're able to hit on two nice bets this weekend, and that protects you from kind of everything else. So
Yeah.
um,
So
that's what I'm
let's
thinking.
unpack this a little bit for people that are listening and not watching.
Yep,
Um, we've got Lando at a podium finish. That's minus 200. So
yep,
if you bet 40, that's a $20 win.
yep,
I think and we'll kind of just go through these bets and kind of why we think this is a good play going into the weekend before we hit qualifying. Because again, we'll come to you guys after qualifying. We'll talk kind of about what we're actually seeing. Let's just take like the last three races. After Miami, we had Imola, which is
yep,
where all the European teams brought their upgrades, right?
yep.
And that tracks was a little bit more suited to traditional racing, I would say.
Oh yeah,
It's Monaco, which is, very, very unique in terms of like overtaking and what can actually happen. I think we were like team Botas for a minute just because he was actually overtaking in Monaco. So
right.
going into Canada, a podium, I don't really feel confident telling you who's going to win, right? This is my feeling on Canada. We are not there anymore. For a really long time, over the last 2 or 3 seasons, watching Formula One, Max would have been kind of the foregone conclusion to win these races, right? I think this is going to be this is the barometer race to me. This is the race that we're going to be looking at, even like months in the future and be like, oh, this is kind of where we actually knew what was going on. What I do think is that McLaren and Lando have given us enough confidence as a podium finisher to do a minus 200 bet, put down 40, win 20. I think that's a really smart play going into the weekend, especially before qualifying. Because let's be honest, even if Lando for some reason doesn't qualify super strongly, like we have been seeing him do, I think that McLaren is strong enough to overtake some of these cars and move up within not just Lando, but also Piastri. I mean, both of them and both of their form going into this race, I feel really confident that McLaren has really won our confidence in that way.
Yeah, I mean, he started, you know, Miami in P5 and won the race. He
Yeah.
potentially would have been on the podium for the last three races, except for Carlos Sainz got a freebie and was able to pit under the red flag and keep his position. So,
Yeah.
in a way, I think Lando's in great form right now. I think Piastri's also in great form, but even if Piastri qualifies ahead of Lando, I still think Lando has the tire management skills with his expertise in Formula One to get back ahead. So I don't necessarily love calling on Lando to finish ahead of Piastri in qualifying, but I think over the
Mhm.
race stint, he's still so good on managing those tires that I think he'll be able to get it done.
Right. And I mean, like, just not that we feel like we haven't seen a ton of team orders this year, but like, let's just be honest, Lando is number one at McLaren. So
Yep.
if we get a situation where the strategy needs to favor one or the other, Lando is the one who I feel much more comfortable looking at as a potential podium finisher in Canada. Just echoing on that point in particular, in terms of like, we don't necessarily feel super comfortable giving you here's the race winner.
Yep.
I think your next call out, the what how the finishing under 5 second margin, I think that is probably my favorite bet of this week going into qualifying, because this this again is one of those bets that we would have never even entertained over the last 2 or 3 years,
Hmm.
because it was Max. It was always Max, and, except for, like, very weird situations, and not only was it Max winning, it was him at these margins that were just way above 5 seconds. I think that, 20 seconds I would have felt more comfortable with for a long time. Here we are going into Canada, and we have a potential Leclerc, we've got a potential Verstappen, and honestly, let's talk a little Verstappen and Red Bull. I don't see Max as somebody who necessarily likes losing. Like, let's just be honest. Max is, if he is capable and if that car is able to perform in a way that will give him daylight in terms of a potential win, I my money is still with Max on who's gonna win this race, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, I like Max to win the race. I just don't think that I think the risk outweighs the betting value right now.
Yeah.
Um,
But I don't think it's gonna be Max in the way we've been thinking about Max, right? I think this is gonna be, we're going into the last 5 laps, and, like, there's still a race there, and that's why I like this bet so much. Under 5 seconds margin, plus 250 odds, so if we put $40 down, we could potentially win 100. This is our, I would say, more risky bet of the week, but I
yeah.
think this is the bet that I'm gonna be most excited to watch throughout the race. Also, this is like, as a viewing experience, we are staying tuned for the entirety of this race to
Yeah.
see what it ends up at.
It locks you in, and I also think, hey, we know it's going to be close. We know Red Bull are going to have to one stop. We know they're going to have to use the hard tire on a very long stint. We know that McLaren are really, really good at the end of stints on hard tires, keeping them in the really good working window. So, yeah, I mean, I think Red Bull are maybe a little bit stronger on Saturdays than they are on Sundays, if you look at Imola, but, I think it's going to be close. Either way around it, I think it's going to be a close race. And then lastly, yeah, I think Yuki's just in great form right now. I think
Oh, I
we need
knew we were don't worry, Harrison, I was coming back to you because I know
we
that.
started there and we ended there, but I think
Do you know what it is? Do you know what it is about Yuki? And I want you just to keep, like, hammering this to us as,
yep.
like, an audience and as people who care about Formula One, but also are looking to, make it all or here or there on betting odds. I think Yuki as a person is not somebody I would necessarily personify as consistent
Okay.
in terms of his demeanor,
Okay.
but that does not mean that his driving has not been consistently good this season. I feel like my in the past where where Yuki would have made me nervous, just like as an intuitive better, not so much based on the stats and the analytics, is, Yuki can kind of, we can hear him on the radio at times. Like, you know what I mean? Like, he can, but that has not been what we have seen in 2024. We've seen 2024, like you said, is somebody who has driven exceedingly well in these races. I
Yep.
think in terms of the middle field or the midfield conversation and just middle of the pack as an overall bet, Yuki Tsunoda at minus 160. So you're betting 40 to win 25. I really love that bet going into Canada before we see the cars on the track, right? So like we've mentioned, we come back to you guys after qualifying to give you kind of our final race day bets.
Yep.
But the reason we come to you early in the week is to kind of talk about, like, the overall season. How does this going? Where can we find value in ways that we probably, once the qualifying is set, we might not be able to find the same value, right? And I think your love for Yuki, I'm starting to be on that bandwagon. Um, Anything else you have to say about the V carb, the RB, the I don't even know what we're calling them at this point, but the Yuki
No, I mean
and
the
one,
RB looks good. I mean
yeah,
they generally seem like the fifth fastest car, and I think that's generally good enough for 10th position. I expect them to be behind the Mercedes, um, eighth position, ninth position, 10th position.
yeah,
Um, they'll be in a strong place. If any of the top people finish, have an issue, then Yuki's potentially a top seven. But I don't want to take anything that's that aggressive. But yeah, I really like Yuki finishing in the points here. I think as we roll into the weekend, we got two drivers who are in really good form, Yuki and Lando, and then the under 5 second margin is just a bet that it's going to be close. So yeah, I think this is how we rock and roll in Canada, the Circuit de Gilles Villeneuve, right?
yeah, yeah. So I think also too, this is such a more satisfying bet just because I think we let off with our midweek Monaco podcast where here's what we think, but literally, if anything weird happens, this goes out the window and there's no way to recover. And what do we see in Monaco? But just
Yeah,
like signs being able
Haas
to,
out, Haas struggling, Ocon having an accident,
yeah,
Max in P6. So it was just a really weird weekend. But I also
yeah,
think, Max had a bad Q3. He was a tenth and a half back for the first runs in Q3. So I don't think Max was actually as bad as he looked, and I think he'll strike back. But I just don't love the betting odds right now on Max to finish P1. I kind of like Lando more. I think that there are a little bit better odds there. And a
yeah,
little bit less risk for him to finish on the podium rather than, betting so much that Max finishes in P1.
yeah. Well, and just before we go here, thoughts on Ferrari, McLaren, Red Bull? I mean, again, this is why I like the under 5 seconds bet so much because I kind of feel like that gives all three of those constructors credit because we're only looking at close finishes if we've got close competition, right?
I think it's an interesting weekend, right? We know McLaren are really strong in Imola, so I think we know that they'll be there. I think the
Yeah,
team to most watch are going to be Ferrari and Red Bull. I think Ferrari struggled a little bit in Imola, but there's less high speed corners here. It's more stop start, a little bit more under braking. So it'll be interesting to see how the Ferrari does on the bumps, how they use those curves to their advantage to generate lap time. I think the last piece will be, Red Bull's had 2 weeks to try to figure out how to get this car to work on street circuits on bumps. I expect some sort of solution. Is it from the factory? Is it different suspension updates? It'll be interesting to see what they not necessarily what the lap time is, but it'll be interesting to see Max in interviews and how he talks on the radio. How is his feel of the car in practice one, practice two, and practice three? Because they're probably going to make some pretty radical changes. But I'm just worried that Red Bull might go too soft on suspension, and it might work on the bumps, but it might struggle through some of the faster sections. So
yeah,
Red Bull is really the team to watch this weekend. I'm also interested to see how close Ferrari get. They have another week to figure out this update that they brought in Imola. That's really strong. So, yeah, this should be
yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. Okay. So just to close this out here, this obviously we are United States based. And so I'm really excited to see kind of the turnout for this race and kind of it is really fun to see the popularity of Formula One grow. And again, not just to give you guys a little bit of context, Harrison has been a very long time, going back to high school, Formula One fan. I am of that newer generation who kind of fell in love with the sport over the pandemic and have been trying to kind of gobble it up, but like I'm very invested now. Obviously, we have a podcast. So we are both very invested, but I'm really excited to see the turnout for the Canadian Grand Prix. Any thoughts on in terms of like what anything else we're expecting this week, just in terms of it being a North American race?
Hmm. I don't think so. I think it's going to rain, so the
Uh,
rain will be an interesting piece to throw into it.
yeah,
It's
that's
potentially going
fun.
to rain this weekend. I
Yeah.
think that helps Max. We know he's really strong in the rain. Um, Yeah, I mean, I don't think the bets change a lot, but I think it will potentially rain this weekend. Maybe that helps Fernando and Aston Martin a little bit.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know.
Yeah.
They're
Any
struggling.
any Aston Mark any Aston Martin redemption story we feel coming with this
No,
being there.
that car is in a bad place. The upgrade has made the car worse.
And it
So
looks like the team's a little bit chaotic too, just from the
Lawrence
rumors
Stroll
that
is firing someone for sure. Maybe
were
beheading them, honestly. But yeah, they're definitely about to lose a technical manager, which is
heading him on.
true. I think ever since the start of last season when they were really challenging for podiums, they've slid back down the grid. Let's be
Yeah,
honest.
absolutely. Yeah. Well, I will be in Scottsdale with my niece, Claire, age 4, Bennett, age 2, big Ferrari fans. They are very excited to watch their race. So I think that's going to be really fun. And just love that Formula One really is just like becoming this thing that we all get to watch together and talk about. I do love these bets, Harrison. I think that this gives us a little bit of we kind of need a bounce back. I mean, Monaco was just, I think the lesson on Monaco was it's Monaco, and we know that it's going to be Monaco, and that's just going to be a weird race for us. I love that we're going into the Canadian Grand Prix with these more traditional kind of like using those analytics and data, like you've said.
Yep.
Just what do we expect based on track times, based on past performance, based on team dynamics, those kinds of things. So just to recap one final time, we've
Yep.
got Lando Norris minus 200. We've got, and for a podium finish, we have got the winning margin under 5 seconds plus 250. And then the final one that we have here is Yuki Tsunoda top 10 or points finish, and that's minus 160. I feel really good about these bets. I think we are set for a really exciting weekend, something that's a little bit more on our time zone, which I appreciate. Thank you. But other than that, anything to take us out, Harrison?
No, I think we're excited for a wet weekend in Canada. I think we got some good picks. Another close weekend. We'll see if Red Bull gets the setup right, and if Max wins, if he's actually how far ahead, or if the challengers are able to get close again. They've won 2 of the last 3, so Max is under pressure again. You love to see it.
Yeah. Here we go.
You love to see it.
Honestly, let's just like 2 seconds before we close. I'm just excited for this, right? Like,
Yeah,
let's go.
it's
Let's
close.
get starting racing. Yeah.
Another close weekend of racing, which is how does that not make everybody happy?
Oh my gosh, right? I know. It's going to be exciting. And I think that's going to make this season all the better. Just going forward, I'm really excited. And this is one of the races I would like to really go to. Honestly, I feel like this is probably let's try to go to the Canadian Grand Prix next year. I think let's get there and let's go because it's going to be a great time. And excited for everyone to make some money on these bets. We will be back with you after qualifying this week to give you our final race day bets where we feel the field will be finishing up and who to put money on. But thank you as always for listening to P1 Picks, a Formula One betting podcast, which we love doing and love learning about.
Thank you guys.